One simple question destroyed a lie that had survived for 10 years. I did not know that on the evening of my daughter's 18th birthday, a single sentence would force me to question everything I believed about my marriage, my divorce, and the man I spent a decade trying to forget. My name is Laura Bennett. I am 52 years old, and for the last 10 years I thought I understood exactly why my marriage ended. My ex-husband Michael left when our daughter Emma was 8. At least that was the story I had carried for a decade. It was the story I told myself during sleepless nights. The story I repeated whenever Emma asked difficult questions. The story that helped me move forward. Michael chose a different life. Michael walked away. Michael stopped fighting for us. Simple, painful, understandable, or so I thought. Emma's 18th birthday fell on a warm Saturday evening in June. We celebrated at my house in Columbus, Ohio. Nothing extravagant. Just close family, a homemade dinner, chocolate cake, and enough laughter to make the house feel alive. Emma had always preferred small gatherings. She inherited that from me. She spent most of the evening smiling, opening gifts, and teasing relatives who kept reminding her she was officially an adult now. Watching her laugh with her cousins, I felt proud. Raising her alone had not been easy, but moments like that made every sacrifice feel worthwhile. Michael attended too. That had become normal over the years. Our relationship was never particularly warm, but it was civil. We learned long ago that Emma deserved parents who could sit in the same room without making her choose sides. Michael arrived carrying a wrapped gift and his usual quiet smile. His hair was grayer than it used to be. Mine probably was too. Time has a way of leaving evidence on all of us. After dinner, someone suggested we look through old family photographs. Emma loved old pictures. Within minutes, several dusty albums appeared from a closet shelf. We gathered around the dining room table while Emma flipped through pages filled with vacations, school events, birthday parties, and ordinary moments frozen in time. The room felt comfortable, familiar, safe. Then everything changed. Emma stopped turning pages. Wait. Her voice immediately caught everyone's attention. She leaned closer to one photograph and frowned. That is weird. I looked over her shoulder. The picture showed Michael standing beside my mother at a nursing home Christmas party. Both of them were smiling. A decorated tree stood behind them. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then I noticed the date printed in the corner. December 2018. For years after our divorce. Why is that weird? I asked. Emma pointed at the picture. Because Dad was there. Several people around the table laughed softly. Obviously, someone said. But Emma did not smile. She kept staring at the photograph. No. I mean, why was he there? Michael shifted slightly in his chair. It was subtle, barely noticeable. Yet for some reason, I saw it. Your grandmother lived there, I replied. Maybe he was visiting for the Christmas event. Emma continued studying the picture. But why? I opened my mouth to answer and realized I did not actually know. During the years after the divorce, my mother remained in assisted living. I visited constantly. Emma visited often. Michael rarely talked about it. At least not with me. Emma flipped to another page. Then another. Her expression changed. There are more. She pulled out several photographs showing Michael at various events involving my mother over multiple years. Birthday celebrations, holiday gatherings, fundraisers, community dinners. The dates stretched across nearly a decade. A strange feeling settled into my stomach. I never saw these before, I said quietly. Michael remained silent. Emma looked from the photographs to her father. Dad. He met her gaze. Yes. She hesitated for a second. Then came the question that stopped the room cold. If you stopped caring about this family after the divorce, why were you still helping Grandma all these years? Nobody spoke. Not me. Not Michael. Not anyone. The laughter vanished. The air seemed to disappear from the room. Emma looked confused by our silence. What? She asked. Then she turned toward her father again. And why did Grandma always say she trusted you more than anyone? I felt my heart begin to race. Because suddenly, for the first time in 10 years, I realized there were pieces of my own story that I did not understand. Michael lowered his eyes to the table. His hands remained perfectly still. Yet his expression told me everything. He knew exactly what Emma had uncovered. And judging by the look on his face, he had spent 10 years hoping nobody would ever ask that question. Nobody seemed interested in birthday cake anymore. The room that had been filled with laughter only minutes earlier now felt strangely quiet. Emma sat at the dining room table surrounded by open photo albums, completely unaware that she had just uncovered something none of us expected. She looked from me to Michael and back again. "Did I say something wrong?" she asked. "No," I answered quickly. "Of course not." But even as I said the words, I could hear the uncertainty in my own voice. Emma was too observant not to notice. She looked down at the photographs again. "Then why does everybody look so uncomfortable?" Nobody had an answer. Eventually, one of my cousins suggested opening presents. Another relative started clearing dishes from the table. The conversation moved on, but not really. The birthday party continued around us, yet my mind remained stuck on those photographs. More importantly, it remained stuck on Michael's reaction. I had known him for nearly 30 years. We were married for 14 of them. I knew when he was annoyed. I knew when he was nervous. And I knew when he was hiding something. That expression on his face was not confusion. It was recognition. Hours later, after the last guest left and the house finally grew quiet, I stood alone in the kitchen loading dishes into the dishwasher. Emma had gone upstairs. The birthday decorations still hung around the dining room. Wrapping paper sat in neat piles waiting to be thrown away. Everything looked normal. Nothing felt normal. A soft knock sounded at the back door. I did not need to check who it was. Michael always knocked the same way. I opened the door. He stood outside holding his car keys. "Can we talk?" he asked. Normally, I would have said no. 10 years of history tends to create habits. But tonight felt different. "Come in." We sat at opposite ends of the kitchen table. The same table where Emma had unknowingly dropped a question into the middle of our lives like a stone into still water. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, I broke the silence. "Why were you there?" Michael looked at me. "Where?" "The nursing home." He exhaled slowly. "Laura." "No," I shook my head. "Do not do that." "Do what?" "Do not answer a question with another question." Michael looked away. The reaction only increased my frustration. For 10 years, I thought I understood what happened between us. My voice remained calm, but barely. "And tonight, I discover you were spending time with my mother after the divorce." "What?" He rubbed his forehead. "It is complicated." I laughed softly. "That is never a good sign." Michael stared at the table for a long moment. Then he said something unexpected. "Your mother asked me not to tell you." I felt my entire body go still. "What?" "She asked me not to tell you." For a second, I wondered if I had heard him correctly. "My mother?" He nodded. "Yes." The answer made no sense. My mother and I were extremely close. She told me everything. At least I thought she did. "Why would she do that?" Michael hesitated. "Because she believed it was the best thing for everyone." I leaned back in my chair. Nothing about this conversation was becoming clearer. In fact, every answer seemed to create 3 new questions. "Michael, you're going to have to do better than that." He gave a tired smile. "I know." The clock on the wall ticked loudly between us. Finally, he stood up and walked toward the hallway. "Wait here." A minute later, he returned carrying a small cardboard box. I immediately recognized it. It had belonged to my mother. I had not seen it since her funeral 2 years earlier. Michael placed the box gently on the table. My pulse quickened. "What is this?" "Something your mother left with me." "Why would she leave something with you?" Michael looked directly at me. "Because she knew one day someone would ask the right question." The words sent a chill through me. Slowly, I opened the box. Inside were several envelopes, a collection of old documents, and a bundle of letters tied together with a faded blue ribbon. Every envelope had a date. Some were more than 10 years old. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up the first one. Then I noticed something written across the front in my mother's handwriting. "For Laura, when the time is right." I looked up at Michael. "You have had these all this time?" He nodded. "Yes." "And you never told me?" His expression was filled with regret. "I made a promise." I stared at the letters sitting in front of me. Suddenly, the photographs from the birthday party seemed much less important. Because whatever secret had survived for 10 years was no longer hidden inside Michael. It was waiting inside that box. For several minutes, neither Michael nor I touched the letters. The cardboard box sat between us on the kitchen table like something fragile and dangerous at the same time. I stared at my mother's handwriting across the first envelope. The familiar curves of each letter instantly transported me backward. Suddenly, I could hear her voice. See her smile. Remember the countless conversations we shared over the years. And yet, somehow, she had managed to keep something this important hidden from me. "I do not understand," I said quietly. Michael remained seated across from me. "I know." "No, I do not think you do." I looked up at him. "If my mother wanted me to know something, She would have told me herself. Michael's expression softened. Not necessarily. The answer irritated me immediately. You are telling me my own mother kept secrets from me? He hesitated. I am telling you she loved you enough to carry burdens she thought would hurt you. The room fell silent again. I hated that part of me believed he might be right. My mother had always been protective, sometimes too protective. When I was a teenager, she hid financial worries from me. When I was in college, she concealed health concerns until after exams. She had a habit of absorbing pain privately if she believed it would spare someone she loved. Still, this felt different. Much different. Slowly, I picked up the first envelope and opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter dated nearly 11 years earlier. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded the pages. The first line immediately caught my attention. Laura, if you are reading this, then Emma finally asked the question I always knew she would ask one day. I stopped breathing for a moment. She predicted this? Michael nodded quietly. I continued reading. Your daughter notices everything. She always has. One day she will see something that does not fit the story. When that happens, you deserve the truth. My eyes moved down the page. Each sentence seemed to pull the ground out from beneath me. Your divorce was never as simple as you believed. I lowered the letter. Michael. He looked at me, but said nothing. What does that mean? His answer came softly. Keep reading. I hated him a little in that moment. Not because of what he was saying. Because of what he was not saying. I returned my attention to the letter. Several paragraphs later, my mother's words became even more confusing. There are things your father did before his death that you never knew. Michael promised me he would never tell you unless I was gone, and the time was right. I stared at the page. My father had died nearly 15 years earlier. He had always been my hero. Honest, reliable, dependable. The kind of man everyone respected. The idea that he was somehow connected to this secret seemed impossible. What does my father have to do with any of this? I asked. Michael looked exhausted. More than you realize. The answer only created more questions. I reached into the box and removed another envelope. This one contained copies of financial documents, bank statements, loan agreements, legal correspondence. At first, none of it made sense. Then I noticed something familiar. My father's signature. Page after page carried his name. I sorted through the paperwork carefully. The dates stretched back years before his death. The amounts were substantial. Tens of thousands of dollars. Some even larger. What am I looking at? Michael leaned forward. Debt. I frowned. My father did not have debt. Michael did not respond immediately. That silence told me more than words could have. No, I whispered. That is not possible. But the documents remained in my hands. Real. Undeniable. A terrible possibility began forming in my mind. The father I remembered and the paperwork in front of me could not both be true. One of them was incomplete. I continued reading. More statements. More letters. More records. Then I found a final note attached to one of the files. This one was written by my mother. The debt became much worse after your father passed away. I had no way to repay it. For several seconds, I simply stared at the sentence. Then I looked up at Michael. What debt? His eyes met mine. The debt that almost cost your mother everything. My heart pounded. And what does that have to do with our divorce? Michael closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, I saw something I had never noticed before. Not guilt. Not fear. Sadness. Deep sadness. Because when the collection notices started arriving, he said quietly, I was the one paying them. The words hit me so hard that I almost dropped the letter. For 10 years, I believed Michael had walked away from our family. Yet sitting in front of me was evidence that somehow, even after the divorce, he had remained connected to it in ways I never knew. And judging by the stack of unopened letters still waiting inside that box, I had only uncovered the first piece of the truth. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller. The stack of documents between us seemed to occupy all the available space. I stared at Michael, waiting for him to tell me I had misunderstood something. Instead, he remained quiet. You paid my father's debt? I asked. Not all of it. His voice was calm, but enough to keep your mother from losing everything. I shook my head slowly. Nothing about this made sense. Why would you do that? Michael looked down at the papers. Because someone had to. The answer frustrated me immediately. That is not an explanation. I know. For a moment, he looked older than I had ever seen him. Not physically, emotionally, like a man carrying a weight for far too long. I reached for another envelope. If Michael was not going to explain everything, perhaps the letters would. This one was dated 8 years ago. Again, it was written by my mother. Michael has asked me many times to tell you the truth. I am the one who refused. I stopped reading and looked up. You wanted to tell me? Michael nodded. Many times. Then why did you listen to her? He gave a sad smile. Because she was your mother. I looked back at the letter. My mother continued explaining how the debt had accumulated long before my father died. Several failed investments. Personal guarantees for friends. Financial decisions he never discussed with the family. When he passed away, the obligations did not disappear. They remained. Hidden. Waiting. My mother discovered the full extent of the problem only after his death. According to the letter, she spent years trying to manage it alone. Then came a sentence that made my stomach drop. The year before your divorce, I told Michael everything. I read the line twice. Then a third time. The year before our divorce? Michael nodded. Yes. My heart began racing again. You knew before I did? Yes. And nobody thought I deserved to know? The hurt in my voice surprised even me. Michael leaned forward. Laura, your mother was terrified. Terrified of what? Of disappointing you. I laughed bitterly. So instead she let me live a lie? Michael remained silent. That silence felt like confirmation. I continued reading. The next few paragraphs described collection agencies, legal notices, and growing financial pressure. My mother's health had already begun declining by then. Stress only made everything worse. Then I reached another sentence that changed the entire direction of my thinking. Michael offered to help because he believed protecting our family mattered more than protecting his reputation. I froze. What does that mean? Michael closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, I saw resignation. It means people needed a reason for why our marriage ended. I stared at him. What are you talking about? For the first time all evening, he answered directly. The debt was consuming everything. Your mother needed financial help. The payments were enormous. We were already struggling. I listened carefully. Go on. I wanted to sell the business. My eyes widened slightly. I remembered. Those arguments. They had happened constantly during the final year of our marriage. You said the business was failing. Because that was easier than explaining the truth. The room fell silent. Memories I had not thought about in years began resurfacing. Late-night arguments. Financial stress. Unexplained meetings. Long absences. At the time, I assumed they were symptoms of a marriage falling apart. Now I was not so sure. Michael pointed toward the letters. Keep reading. I picked up another page. My mother's handwriting seemed shakier on this one. Michael agreed to help me under one condition. He wanted Laura protected from the burden. I never stopped feeling guilty for accepting that sacrifice. My throat tightened. Sacrifice. The word felt completely incompatible with the version of events I had believed for 10 years. What sacrifice? I whispered. Michael looked out the kitchen window into the darkness. The kind that makes people hate you. The answer sent a chill through me. Suddenly, I remembered something that had never made sense. During the divorce, Michael rarely defended himself. He accepted accusations. He let people assume the worst. Friends drifted away from him. Some family members blamed him entirely. Through all of it, he remained mostly silent. At the time, I interpreted that silence as guilt. Now I was beginning to wonder if it meant something else. My eyes returned to the box. There were still dozens of documents left. More letters. More records. More pieces of a story I clearly never understood. Then I noticed a sealed envelope resting at the very bottom. Unlike the others, it was marked with a single handwritten note. Open this last. I turned it over slowly. The date written on the back was exactly 3 weeks before my mother died. And somehow, deep down, I already knew that whatever waited inside would explain everything. I stared at the sealed envelope for what felt like an eternity. Every instinct told me to open it immediately. Yet another part of me was afraid. Afraid that whatever waited inside would permanently change the way I remembered my parents, my marriage, and the last 10 years of my life. Michael remained silent. Across the table, he was no longer trying to guide the conversation. The decision belonged to me now. Slowly, I slid my finger beneath the flap and opened the envelope. Inside was a single handwritten letter. Unlike the others, it was several pages long. The date at the top confirmed what I had already seen. 3 weeks before my mother died. I began reading. Laura, if you have reached this letter, then you know enough to finally understand what happened. I stopped for a moment and took a breath. Then I continued. There are truths a mother never wants her child to carry. I convinced myself that protecting you was an act of love. Looking back, I am no longer certain. My eyes moved down the page. Your father was a good man in many ways. He loved you deeply, but he made financial decisions that damaged more lives than he ever realized. After he died, I discovered obligations that I could not repay. I was ashamed. I did not want you to remember him differently. I felt my chest tighten. Even now, my mother was trying to protect his memory. Then came the paragraph that changed everything. When Michael learned the truth, he offered to help. Not because he was responsible, not because he benefited, because he believed family responsibility did not end when things became difficult. I lowered the letter and looked at Michael. He stared quietly at the tabletop. There was no pride in his expression, no expectation of gratitude, only sadness. I returned to the letter. I refused his help at first. Then the legal notices became more serious. I was running out of options. Michael began making payments for money he could not afford to lose. He worked longer hours, sold assets, delayed his own plans. I felt dizzy reading the words. I remembered those years. The stress, the arguments, the endless conversations about finances. At the time, I believed Michael was becoming distant, secretive, unreliable. Now a different picture was beginning to emerge. My mother continued. Eventually, Michael told me he could not continue carrying both burdens. He could save the business or continue hiding the truth. He could not do both. My hands trembled. Save the business. I suddenly remembered one specific argument from 11 years ago. Michael wanted to sell his share of a growing company. I had accused him of being reckless. He never explained why he felt trapped. He simply accepted my anger. I kept reading. When he finally suggested telling you everything, I begged him not to. I was afraid you would lose respect for your father. I was afraid you would blame me. Most of all, I was afraid the truth would destroy our family. Tears blurred my vision. The tragedy of the sentence struck me immediately. In trying to prevent damage, she had created a different kind of damage. Years of misunderstanding, years of resentment, years of silence. Then I reached the paragraph that explained the divorce. The separation was never caused by a lack of love. It happened because too many secrets were being carried by too few people. Financial pressure became emotional pressure. Emotional pressure became distance. Distance became conflict. By the time the marriage ended, neither of you were fighting the real problem anymore. I stopped reading. The kitchen was completely silent. Somewhere upstairs, Emma was probably asleep, unaware that her birthday had become the beginning of an entirely different story. You should have told me, I whispered. Michael nodded immediately. I know. 10 years, Michael. I know. Do you have any idea how many times I replayed everything? His voice remained calm. Every day. I looked at him carefully. For the first time, I believed him. The letter still had one page remaining. I forced myself to continue. If there is one thing I regret most, it is allowing Michael to carry blame that belonged to all of us. He honored every promise he made to me, even when it cost him friendships, even when it damaged his relationship with you, even when Emma began believing he had walked away. The tears came freely now, because suddenly I understood why my mother trusted him, why she kept photographs, why he continued visiting her, why he attended events no one expected him to attend. He was not preserving a secret. He was honoring a promise. Then I reached the final sentence. One day Emma will ask a question that exposes everything. When that day comes, please remember this. The truth is not that Michael abandoned your family. The truth is that he spent 10 years protecting it. I slowly lowered the letter. Across the table, Michael finally met my eyes. And for the first time in more than a decade, I realized I might not know the full story of our divorce at all. I barely slept that night. After Michael left, I remained at the kitchen table long after midnight, surrounded by letters, financial records, and memories that no longer fit together the way they once had. Every document seemed to challenge something I thought I knew. Every page forced me to reconsider a decade of assumptions. By morning, I still had not reached a conclusion. I only had questions. Emma came downstairs around 8 o'clock wearing sweatpants and carrying her phone. She immediately noticed the paperwork spread across the table. Mom, she asked carefully, are you okay? I looked up at my daughter, the person who had unknowingly started all of this. I'm not sure. Emma sat beside me. Did Dad tell you something? I hesitated. For 18 years, I had tried to protect her from adult problems. Suddenly, that seemed almost impossible. He showed me some things Grandma left behind. Emma glanced at the letters. About what? I took a deep breath. About the years before the divorce. Her expression changed immediately. Curiosity mixed with concern. And I looked out the window for a moment. And I think there are parts of the story I never understood. Emma remained quiet. That was one of her strengths. She listened before speaking. Eventually, she asked the question I had been avoiding all morning. Did Dad lie? The answer should have been simple. Instead, it felt incredibly complicated. I do not know, I admitted. But I think Grandma did. Emma looked surprised. Grandma? I nodded slowly. She was trying to protect people. Emma leaned back in her chair. That sounds like her. The observation made me smile despite everything. It really did sound like my mother. She spent her entire life protecting others. Sometimes even from truths they deserve to know. Later that afternoon, I found myself driving across town to visit a small cemetery on the edge of Columbus. The sky was overcast. The weather matched my mood perfectly. I carried copies of several letters in my purse. Not because I planned to read them, because I needed them nearby. My mother's headstone sat beneath a large maple tree. I stood there quietly for several minutes. You should have told me, I whispered. The words disappeared into the wind. For years, I blamed Michael for almost everything connected to our divorce. Looking back, I realized how easy that had been. It is comforting when pain has a clear target. It is harder when responsibility is shared. I sat on a nearby bench and pulled out one of the letters. This time I focused on details I had overlooked before. Dates, notes in the margins, handwritten reminders. Gradually, a pattern emerged. My mother had not simply accepted Michael's help. She relied on it. More importantly, she trusted him. Not occasionally, consistently. Then I noticed something else. Several payment records continued long after the divorce became final. Some even extended into the final years of my mother's life. I stared at the numbers. Why? I asked aloud. There was no reason for Michael to continue helping. Not legally, not financially, not personally. Yet he did. The realization followed me home. That evening, my phone rang. Michael. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Old habits are difficult to break. Eventually, I answered. Hello. How are you doing? He asked. It was such a simple question, yet it carried genuine concern. Honestly, I laughed softly, confused. Michael sighed. That makes two of us. We spoke for nearly an hour. Not about the divorce. Not about blame. Not even about the letters. Instead, we talked about memories. Small things. Moments from years ago. As the conversation continued, I noticed something surprising. There were gaps. Entire pieces of our shared history that we remembered differently. Not because one of us was dishonest. Because neither of us knew the whole picture at the time. Before hanging up, Michael became unusually quiet. There is something else in the box, he said. My pulse immediately quickened. What? A folder? Your mother wanted you to find after reading everything. I frowned. I thought I looked through all of it. You did not. The certainty in his voice caught my attention. What is in the folder? Silence. Then a careful answer. The reason she believed the truth would change how you saw your father forever. I froze. Everything I had learned so far already felt overwhelming. Yet something told me the biggest revelation was still waiting. And for the first time since Emma asked that innocent question at her birthday party, I realized the secret was never really about Michael. It was about someone I thought I knew better than anyone. The next morning, I pulled the cardboard box back onto the kitchen table before I could change my mind. Emma had left for a summer volunteer program, and the house was quiet. Part of me wanted to delay whatever came next. Another part knew I had already crossed a line from which there was no returning. I needed to know the truth. I carefully removed every envelope and document until only the bottom of the box remained visible. At first, I saw nothing unusual. Then I noticed a thin piece of cardboard that seemed slightly raised. My heart began beating faster. Sliding my fingers underneath it, I lifted the false bottom. A manila folder rested beneath it. No label, no date, just a folder my mother had hidden where only someone determined to find every answer would discover it. For several seconds, I simply stared at it. Then I opened it. The first thing I found was a letter addressed to Michael. Not to me, not to Emma, to Michael. The date was 12 years old. I unfolded the pages and began reading. Michael, if you are reading this, then I have finally decided to tell you everything. Thank you for helping me when I did not deserve it. The sentence stopped me immediately. My mother never spoke that way. She was proud, independent. Yet here she sounded burdened by guilt. I continued reading. The debt was not entirely your father-in-law's fault. I hid information from him for years because I was embarrassed. My stomach tightened. Suddenly, the story shifted again. Until that moment, I had believed the secret centered on my father. Now it appeared my mother had been carrying secrets of her own. Several pages later, the truth became clearer. Years before my father's death, my mother had co-signed financial agreements for her younger brother, my Uncle Richard. I remembered him well. Charming, funny, always full of big plans. What I did not know was that most of those plans failed. Repeatedly. According to the documents, my uncle accumulated enormous debt through failed business ventures. My mother spent years helping him quietly. She hid it from everyone, including my father. When the situation finally became impossible to conceal, my father stepped in and tried to stabilize everything. Instead, he became legally connected to obligations that continued growing after his death. I leaned back in my chair. The image of my father as a careless man creating financial chaos no longer fit. Neither did the image of my mother as a completely innocent victim. The reality was far more complicated. They were flawed people trying to protect family. The consequences simply spiraled beyond their control. Then I found another document. This one was written by Michael himself. It appeared to be a personal journal entry, or perhaps a letter he never intended anyone to read. The date matched the final year of our marriage. I read slowly. Laura deserves the truth. Every day I wait makes this worse. But her mother is terrified she will lose both parents. One through death, and one through disappointment. I do not know what the right answer is anymore. My eyes filled with tears. For years, I imagined Michael as emotionally distant during that period because he no longer cared. Yet the words on the page revealed someone trapped between impossible choices. He was trying to protect my mother, protect my father's memory, protect me, protect our marriage, and failing at all of them simultaneously. As the afternoon sunlight shifted across the kitchen floor, I continued reading document after document. A clear picture finally emerged. The debt had not ended our marriage by itself. The secrecy had. Every important decision had been made in silence. My mother kept secrets from my father. My father kept worries from me. My mother kept truths from me. Michael kept promises from my mother. Everyone believed they were protecting someone. Instead, they built walls between the people they loved. By the time Emma came home that evening, I was sitting exactly where she had left me. She immediately noticed the folder. "You found something." It was not a question. I nodded slowly. Emma sat beside me. Was Dad telling the truth? I looked at my daughter, then at the stack of papers, then back at her. "Yes," I said quietly. "But that is not the surprising part." Emma frowned. "Then what is?" I glanced toward the final document still resting inside the folder. It was a legal agreement signed by my mother, my father, and Michael just 6 months before my divorce. And for the first time, I realized Michael had not been the only person carrying this secret for 10 years. Somehow, without knowing it, I had been living inside it too. Emma sat across from me at the kitchen table, waiting patiently while I stared at the final legal document. The evening sunlight had faded, and the room was growing darker by the minute. Neither of us had bothered turning on the lights. Somehow it felt wrong to interrupt a moment that had already altered so much of what we believed. "Mom," Emma finally asked, "what was in the agreement?" I looked down at the paper again. 3 signatures appeared at the bottom. My father's, my mother's, Michael's. The date was exactly 6 months before the divorce. "I think I know why Michael never defended himself," I said quietly. Emma frowned. "What do you mean?" Slowly, I began reading portions of the agreement aloud. It was not a loan document. It was not a business contract. It was a family arrangement. According to the paperwork, my father had discovered the full extent of the financial problems shortly before his death. Realizing the situation could threaten my mother's future, he created a plan with Michael. If the debt ever became unmanageable, certain assets would be sold, responsibilities would be transferred, and financial obligations would be consolidated under agreements designed to protect my mother from losing her home and retirement savings. "That sounds reasonable," Emma said. "It would have been," I replied, "if everything had gone according to plan. My father died unexpectedly before most of the arrangements could be completed. What remained was confusion, unfinished paperwork, and growing debt. Then Michael stepped in, not because he was required to, because he believed he was honoring a promise made to my father. I felt tears forming again. For years, I had viewed the final months of my marriage through a single lens. Michael became distracted. Michael worked longer hours. Michael seemed emotionally exhausted. I interpreted every change as evidence that he was pulling away from our family. Now I was beginning to see a different possibility. He was carrying responsibilities I never knew existed. Did Grandma know all of this? Emma asked. Yes. And Grandpa? Part of it. Emma leaned back in her chair. That means everyone was trying to protect everyone else. I laughed softly. Exactly. The irony felt almost unbearable. Every secret had been motivated by love. Yet every secret had also created pain. Later that night, after Emma went upstairs, I called Michael. He answered on the second ring. Hello. I found the agreement. Silence. Then a quiet response. I figured you would. I sat down at the kitchen table again. Why did you never tell me about it? His answer came immediately. Because your mother made me promise. You could have broken that promise. Yes. Why did you not? For several seconds, I heard nothing except his breathing. Finally he spoke. Because by then, the damage was already done. I closed my eyes. What does that mean? It means every conversation felt impossible. His voice carried a sadness I had not noticed before. The longer I waited, the harder it became. Eventually, I convinced myself that keeping the promise was the least harmful choice. I understood more than I wanted to admit. Sometimes mistakes are not made in a single moment. Sometimes they are made gradually, through fear, hesitation, and silence. We talked for nearly an hour. For the first time in 10 years, neither of us argued. Neither of us defended old positions. We simply compared memories. And something remarkable happened. The pieces began fitting together. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to reveal a truth neither of us had recognized. Our marriage had not ended because one person stopped caring. It ended because too many people carried burdens alone. Before hanging up, Michael said something that stayed with me long after the call ended. There is one thing I never understood. What? I asked. Why your mother kept one final letter separate from everything else. My pulse quickened immediately. There is another letter? I never opened it. Where is it? Inside the agreement folder. I looked down at the stack of documents. Until that moment, I had been so focused on contracts and records that I completely missed a small sealed envelope tucked inside the back cover. My name was written across the front in my mother's handwriting. Nothing else. No date. No instructions. Just my name. As I carefully picked it up, a strange feeling settled over me. Every discovery so far had explained the past. Somehow, I knew this letter would explain something much more important. It would explain why my mother believed the truth had to wait 10 years to be understood. For several minutes, I simply stared at the envelope with my name written across the front. It was strange how something so small could feel heavier than every document I had read so far. The financial records explained the debt. The letters explained the secrecy. The agreements explained Michael's involvement. But somehow, I sensed this final letter would explain something entirely different. It would explain my mother. Slowly, I opened it. The paper inside was folded only once. Unlike her earlier letters, this one was brief, direct, personal. Laura, if you are reading this, then you finally know enough to understand what I could never explain while I was alive. My throat tightened immediately. My mother had always written the way she spoke. Simple words. Honest emotions. I continued reading. The greatest mistake I made was believing love and truth were opposites. I thought I had to choose one or the other. I stopped and closed my eyes for a moment. The sentence hit harder than I expected, because it perfectly described everything that had happened. My mother loved us. My father loved us. Michael loved us. Yet all of them had hidden important truths believing they were acting out of love. My eyes returned to the page. I protected your father's memory. I protected my brother. I protected you. I even tried to protect Emma. In doing so, I asked everyone around me to carry burdens that were never theirs to carry. Tears rolled down my cheeks. Not because I was angry, because I finally understood how frightened she must have been. Fear has a way of disguising itself as protection. The letter continued. Michael wanted to tell you the truth many times. More than once, he argued with me about it. Every time, I convinced him to wait. Every year that passed made the truth more difficult to reveal. I looked toward the stack of documents spread across the table. 10 years. 10 years built upon one delayed conversation after another. Then I reached the final paragraph. If you take anything from this, let it be this. Do not spend the rest of your life deciding who was right and who was wrong. Spend it understanding why people made the choices they did. Understanding heals more than blame ever will. I lowered the letter and sat quietly. The house was completely still. Somewhere in the distance, a lawn mower hummed faintly. A car passed outside. Ordinary sounds. Yet nothing felt ordinary anymore. For years, I viewed my family's story through the lens of betrayal. Now I was seeing it through the lens of fear, sacrifice, and imperfect love. The next morning, I called Michael and asked if we could meet. He sounded surprised but agreed immediately. We met at a small coffee shop near downtown Columbus. The same place where we used to stop on Saturday mornings years ago when Emma was little. Walking inside felt strangely familiar. Michael was already there when I arrived. He stood as I approached the table. For a moment, neither of us knew what to say. Finally, I sat down and placed the letter between us. I read it. He nodded slowly. I figured you had. She blamed herself. Michael looked at the envelope. Because she always did. We spent the next 2 hours talking. Really talking. Not revisiting old arguments. Not defending past decisions. Just comparing experiences. Piece by piece, we reconstructed the final years of our marriage. What surprised me most was how different our memories were. Events I interpreted as withdrawal, he remembered as exhaustion. Moments I saw as indifference, he remembered as frustration and helplessness. Neither of us had understood what the other was carrying. At one point, Michael smiled sadly. Do you know what I regret most? I shook my head. I stopped explaining. The answer lingered between us. Because deep down, I knew I had done the same thing. We both reached a point where misunderstanding felt permanent. So we stopped trying. As the conversation continued, something unexpected happened. The anger I carried for years began fading. Not disappearing, just loosening its grip. Understanding was replacing it. Before leaving, Michael reached into his wallet and removed an old photograph. I found this recently. He handed it to me. The picture showed my parents, Michael, me, and a young Emma at a 4th of July picnic nearly 15 years earlier. Everyone was smiling. Everyone looked happy. On the back, written in my mother's handwriting, were 4 simple words. Family is worth protecting. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I smiled through fresh tears. Because for the first time, I understood both the wisdom and the tragedy hidden inside those words. And as I looked at the photograph, I realized the truth Emma uncovered had changed more than my understanding of the past. It was beginning to change the future too. The weeks that followed felt strangely different. Not dramatic, not sudden, just different. For the first time in years, I was no longer carrying anger as my constant companion. That did not mean every question had been answered. It did not mean every wound had healed. But something fundamental had shifted. The truth had finally entered the room, and once truth arrives, it becomes difficult for old misunderstandings to survive. Emma noticed the change before anyone else. One evening, while we were cleaning up after dinner, she leaned against the kitchen counter and studied me carefully. You smile more now, she said. I laughed softly. Do I? Yes. She shrugged. You seem lighter. Her observation surprised me because she was right. For years, part of my energy had been spent maintaining a version of the past, defending it, repeating it, believing it. Now that version was gone. In its place stood something more complicated, but also more honest. A few days later, Emma asked a question that caught me completely off guard. Would it be weird if Dad came with us? Came with us where? I asked. Grandma's memorial garden. Every year on my mother's birthday, we visited a small community garden dedicated in her honor. It was a tradition Emma and I had maintained since her passing. For a moment, I considered the question. Then I realized something. My mother had spent years trusting Michael, perhaps longer than I ever understood. Excluding him suddenly felt wrong. No, I said quietly. It would not be weird. Emma smiled. Good. On the morning of the visit, the weather was perfect. Clear skies, gentle sunshine, the kind of day my mother would have loved. Michael met us at the entrance to the garden carrying a small bouquet of white flowers. For a brief second, all 3 of us stood there awkwardly. Then Emma solved the problem by taking both our arms and pulling us forward. Come on, she said. Grandma would hate all this standing around. Michael laughed. I laughed too. The sound felt natural. Inside the garden, we spent nearly an hour walking among the flowers and trees. We shared stories, memories, small moments from years ago. Some were funny, some emotional. Yet what struck me most was how easily Michael remembered details everyone else had forgotten. My mother's favorite bench, her favorite flower, the exact way she drank her coffee. The memories were not forced. They came naturally. Because he had genuinely been present during those years, I assumed he had disappeared. At one point, Emma wandered ahead to take photographs. Michael and I found ourselves standing alone beside a rose garden. "She would be happy today," he said. I looked toward the memorial plaque carrying my mother's name. "I think so too." Silence settled comfortably between us, not the painful silence that once existed. A peaceful one. Finally, I asked a question that had remained in the back of my mind for weeks. "Why did you keep helping after the debt was gone?" Michael looked surprised. "What do you mean?" "The records showed most of the obligations were resolved years before Mom passed away." He nodded slowly. "That is true. Then why did you keep visiting?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because she was family." For simple words. Yet they explained everything. Family. Not because of paperwork. Not because of obligation. Not because of promises. Because family mattered to him. I felt tears forming again. This entire journey began because Emma asked a question. Yet every answer seemed to reveal another layer of humanity I had failed to see. Later that afternoon, after we left the garden, Emma insisted on taking a photograph. The three of us stood together beneath a large maple tree. She set her phone on a timer and ran back toward us. Just before the picture was taken, she slipped between us and wrapped an arm around each of our shoulders. The camera captured the moment perfectly. Not a reunited couple. Not a repaired marriage. Something more realistic. Three people who had finally stopped carrying the weight of a misunderstanding. That evening, Emma posted the photograph in a private family group. Within minutes, relatives began commenting. Most expressed happiness. Some expressed surprise. One message stood out above all the others. It came from my Uncle Richard, the same uncle whose decisions had unknowingly started so much of this story. The message was short. "I am glad the truth finally found its way home." I stared at the words for a long time. Then I realized something profound. For 10 years, everyone involved had been waiting for the right conversation, the right moment, the right opportunity. In the end, none of it began with lawyers, documents, or confessions. It began because an 18-year-old daughter looked at an old photograph and asked a simple question that nobody was prepared to answer. The message from Uncle Richard stayed in my mind for days. I had spent so much time trying to understand my mother, my father, and Michael that I almost forgot another person stood near the center of the story. Not because he intended harm, not because he wanted anyone to suffer, but because choices made years ago have a way of reaching far beyond the moment they are made. A week after the visit to the memorial garden, my phone rang unexpectedly. The caller ID displayed Richard's name. For a second, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Then I answered. "Hello." His voice sounded older than I remembered. "Laura, I was hoping we could talk." We agreed to meet the following afternoon at a small diner halfway between our homes. When I arrived, he was already sitting in a booth near the window. Time had changed him. His hair was almost completely gray now. The confidence I remembered from childhood had softened into something quieter, more reflective. After we ordered coffee, neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, he broke the silence. "Your mother would be angry with me for calling." I smiled sadly. "Probably." He nodded. "She spent years protecting me." Hearing those words directly from him felt different than reading them in a letter. More real somehow. Richard looked down at his coffee cup. "I owe you an apology." "For what?" He laughed softly. "Where do I start?" The sadness in his voice immediately caught my attention. "You do not owe me responsibility for every bad decision that happened." "Maybe not every decision." He sighed. "But more than a few." For the next hour, he told me stories I had never heard. Failed investments. Business ventures that looked promising before collapsing. Loans he believed he could repay. Promises he genuinely intended to keep. Each mistake seemed reasonable when viewed individually. Together, they created a disaster that affected everyone around him. "Your mother never stopped believing I could fix it," he said quietly. "Even when I stopped believing it myself." I stared out the window. The more I learned, the more complicated the entire situation became. Nobody fit neatly into the role of hero or villain. People made mistakes. Other people tried to help. Good intentions collided with fear and pride. The result was years of silence. Before we left, Richard handed me a small envelope. "What is this?" I asked. "Something your mother gave me years ago." My pulse quickened immediately. "Another letter?" He smiled. No, inside the envelope was a photograph. It showed my parents, Richard, Michael, and me at a family barbecue long before Emma was born. Everyone looked young, relaxed, happy. On the back, my mother had written a single sentence. Families survive when people tell each other the truth. I stared at the words for several seconds. Then I laughed softly. That is ironic. Richard smiled sadly. She knew it too. That evening, I showed the photograph to Emma. She studied it carefully before turning it over and reading the message. Grandma really wrote that. She did. Emma shook her head. It sounds like she spent years trying to teach everyone something she struggled to do herself. The observation was so accurate that I could not help smiling. You sound older than 18. I had a good teacher. She hugged me before walking toward the stairs. Halfway up, she stopped. Mom. Yes. Are you glad I asked that question? I looked at her. The question that began this journey. The question that uncovered 10 years of hidden history. The question that forced all of us to confront truths we never expected to face. More than you know, I said. Emma smiled and disappeared upstairs. Later that night, I sat alone on the back porch watching the sunset. For the first time in many years, I felt something close to peace. Not because every mystery had been solved. Not because the past could be changed. Peace came from understanding. The truth had not erased the mistakes. It had simply allowed them to be seen clearly. And as the last light faded beyond the trees, I found myself thinking about something my mother wrote in her final letter. Understanding heals more than blame ever will. After everything that had happened, I finally knew she was right. The following spring arrived quietly. Months had passed since Emma's birthday, yet the effects of that single evening continued shaping our lives in ways I never expected. Some changes were obvious. Others were small enough to notice. Only when I stopped and looked back. Emma finished her first year of college with excellent grades. She seemed more confident than ever. Not because she had uncovered a family secret, but because she had learned something important about people. They are rarely as simple as they appear. One Saturday afternoon, she came home carrying a box of old photographs she had borrowed from a relative. We spread them across the dining room table, the same table where this journey began. As we sorted through the pictures, we laughed at outdated hairstyles, old cars, and family vacations nobody had mentioned in years. At one point, Emma held up a photograph of my parents standing beside Michael at a county fair. You know, she said, I think Grandma would be relieved. I smiled. About what? About all of us finally talking to each other. The answer stayed with me. Because she was right. The biggest change was not the truth itself. The biggest change was what happened after the truth arrived. Conversations became easier. Assumptions became fewer. Questions became welcome instead of frightening. A few weeks later, Emma organized a small family barbecue. Nothing formal. Just relatives gathering together on a warm afternoon. To my surprise, Michael attended. So did Uncle Richard. Years earlier, such a gathering would have felt impossible. Too much history. Too much tension. Yet as I watched everyone talking beneath strings of patio lights, I realized something remarkable. Healing does not always arrive dramatically. Sometimes it arrives through ordinary moments that slowly replace old memories with new ones. Near sunset, Emma tapped a glass and got everyone's attention. I want a family picture, she announced. Groans and laughter immediately followed. Nobody likes organizing large group photographs. Still, everyone cooperated. We gathered near the backyard fence while Emma adjusted a camera tripod. Just before the timer activated, she looked toward me and smiled. It was the same smile she wore as a child whenever she knew something important that everyone else had not figured out yet. The camera flashed. A single image captured 3 generations of stories, mistakes, forgiveness, and second chances. Later that evening, after most guests had gone home, Michael helped carry folding chairs into the garage. As we finished, he paused beside the doorway. Can I ask you something? He said. Of course. He looked thoughtful for a moment. Do you ever wish none of this had happened? The question deserved an honest answer. I considered it carefully. I wish people had told the truth sooner. He nodded. Me too. But if you are asking whether I wish I never learned the truth, then no. Michael seemed surprised. Why? I looked toward the house where Emma was laughing with relatives through an open window. Because now I understand what really happened. He smiled softly. Understanding. Yes. I laughed. Apparently my mother knew what she was talking about after all. We stood there for a moment. sharing a silence that no longer felt uncomfortable. Then Michael reached into his pocket and handed me something. It was the photograph from years ago, the one with my parents and the handwritten message on the back. "You should keep it," he said. I turned it over and read the familiar words again. Family is worth protecting. This time, however, I noticed something different. Protection did not mean hiding the truth. Protection meant trusting people enough to face the truth together. As darkness settled across the neighborhood, I carried the photograph inside and placed it beside the final letter my mother wrote. Two reminders. One about family, one about honesty, both connected by lessons learned far later than any of us intended. Looking back now, it amazes me that everything began with a simple question from an 18-year-old daughter. A question asked without suspicion or strategy, just curiosity. Yet sometimes curiosity accomplishes what years of silence cannot. It opens a door. On the other side of that door, we found grief, mistakes, secrets, sacrifice, forgiveness, and understanding. Most importantly, we found each other again. And if there is one truth I carry forward from this story, it is not about debt, divorce, or hidden letters. It is this: the truth may arrive late. It may arrive quietly. It may even arrive after 10 long years. But when it finally arrives, it gives people the chance to stop living inside old assumptions and start living inside reality. For my family, that chance changed everything. 2 years later, I found myself standing on a university campus holding a paper cup of coffee while hundreds of families filled the lawn around me. The morning air was cool, and the excitement was impossible to miss. Graduates moved through the crowd wearing caps and gowns. Cameras flashed constantly. Proud parents searched for familiar faces. And somewhere among them was Emma. Watching her walk across that campus felt different from every other milestone. Not because she was graduating, because I understood how many people had quietly helped her reach that moment. Some were still present. Some were gone. But all of them had left fingerprints on the life she was building. "You look nervous," Michael said beside me. I laughed softly. "I am not nervous. You have been checking the program every 5 minutes. That is called being prepared." He smiled. Of course. The easy conversation still surprised me sometimes. Not because we had become the people we were 20 years earlier. We had not. Life changes people. Experience changes people. We were simply two adults who finally understood each other more clearly than before. A few rows ahead, Uncle Richard was already waving at every graduate who walked past, whether he knew them or not. The sight made me smile. Some things never change. Finally, Emma's name was called. The applause around us blended into a single wave of sound as she crossed the stage and accepted her diploma. For a brief moment, she turned toward the audience. Even from a distance, I could see the smile on her face. The same smile that had started this entire journey. After the ceremony ended, families flooded the campus lawn. It took nearly 20 minutes before we found her. The instant we did, she threw her arms around both of us. "I did it," she said. "You did," I replied. "We are proud of you." Michael nodded. "Very proud." Photographs followed. More photographs than any reasonable person should take. Yet nobody complained. Not today. As the afternoon continued, Emma suggested visiting a nearby park before everyone headed home. We found a quiet spot overlooking a small lake. Families were scattered across the grass, celebrating similar milestones. At one point, Emma sat beside me on a wooden bench. "Can I ask you something?" she said. I laughed. Every major event in our lives seems to begin with that sentence. She laughed too. Fair point. Then her expression softened. "Do you ever think about how different things would be if I had never asked that question?" I considered the lake for a moment before answering. Sometimes. And I think we all would have continued carrying stories that were not entirely true. Emma nodded slowly. That is what I think too. The conversation drifted elsewhere after that. Yet her question remained with me. Because the answer was larger than our family. The truth had not magically repaired every mistake. It had not erased pain. It had not rewritten history. What it did was give us permission to stop fighting ghosts. Once we understood what really happened, we could finally respond to reality instead of assumptions. As the sun began setting, we prepared to leave. Before walking away, Emma asked someone nearby to take one final photograph. We stood together near the water. Michael on one side, me on the other, Emma in the middle. The camera clicked. For a brief second, time seemed to pause. Later that evening, after everyone returned home, I placed the printed photograph beside the old family picture my mother had left behind. The two images sat next to each other on a shelf in my living room. One captured a family before the secrets. The other captured a family after the truth. Looking at them together, I finally understood something that had taken years to learn. Families are not defined by perfection. They are defined by what happens after mistakes are discovered. They are defined by whether people choose blame or understanding, distance or connection, silence or honesty. I turned off the lights and prepared for bed. Before leaving the room, I glanced once more at the photographs. Then I smiled. 10 years of silence had ended because a daughter asked a simple question. The answer changed all of us. And in the end, that answer gave our family something more valuable than certainty. It gave us the chance to understand one another while we still had time.